Hello and welcome to the Thursday, June 26, 2025 edition of the SANS Internet Storm Center's Stormcast. My name is Johannes Ulrich, and this episode brought to you by the SANS.edu Graduate Certificate Program in Cybersecurity Engineering is recorded in Stockholm, Germany. And yes, we do have another vulnerability from Citrix Netscaler. I just talked about a vulnerability that allowed session credentials to leak a couple days ago. This one is just a denial of service vulnerability, still a critical CVSS score, and this vulnerability apparently is already being exploited. Just like the session leak vulnerability, this particular vulnerability affects any Netscaler that is configured as a gateway, so a VPN virtual server, an ICAP proxy, a CVPN, RDP proxy, which is a very common configuration for these types of devices. So definitely pay attention to this. Also, end-of-life versions of Netscaler are vulnerable, but of course there's no patch necessarily available for them. Patches have been made available now for the currently supported versions, and you should definitely be applying them quickly, given that this vulnerability may already be exploited. And companies that offer servers for rent often use a software package called Web Panel in order to manage CentOS servers. This package has two parts. One is the admin part that only administrator is supposed to log into, and of course gains administrator privileges to the server. And then there is a user panel that the user can use to essentially manage their own website on that particular server. And the intent is that you have multiple users share the server, and Web Panel is supposed to keep those users apart, which of course is always a little bit tricky. In particular, in this case, Web Panel suffered from a arbitrary file upload vulnerability. This allows an attacker to, for example, upload bash RC files and such into other users' directories, and that can then lead to arbitrary code execution as this other user. This vulnerability has been addressed, has been fixed. Proof of concept exploits and a detailed description is available. So this is a vulnerability that you should consider being exploited at this point. And one particular case where you want to pay attention here is if you're not administering a server via Web Panel, but you're using a server that is administered via Web Panel, you still want to make sure that the version of Web Panel is being updated, because your data may be at risk on that server, even though, of course, you can't do anything other than notify the administrator to please apply the update. And Gogs is somewhat popular, even though not really very well maintained Git server. If you want a nice web-based interface for Git, that's sort of one of the self-hosted options that you have. Well, they suffered from an arbitrary file deletion vulnerability they just patched. This is related to a vulnerability they patched almost a year ago. SonarQube back then published a nice blog with details about the vulnerability and how to exploit it. But as they patched this vulnerability, well, they didn't properly consider symlinks, which now led to this second vulnerability. The problem with Git repositories is if you can delete or truncate arbitrary files, you may be able, and that's the case here, to delete the head file, so the .git/head file. Once you truncate or delete that file, then the Git repository is invalid. It's considered a plain repository. You can now adjust configurations in that repository, which will lead to arbitrary code execution. So not just file deletion here, it's a direct path to arbitrary code execution. And SonarQube showed that nicely in their blog from a year ago. And Let's Encrypt announced that they're almost ready to start issuing IP address-based certificate. This is a major departure from sort of traditional TLS certificates. Usually they include a host name or multiple host names, but now you may also include an IP address. And of course, that's important for devices and such that may not have a host name. Now, there are some constraints around this. First of all, the certificates will only be valid for 6 days. There will also be an allow list process. So you have to basically apply to be part of the allow list in order to use these certificates. At this point, they have issued a sample certificate, which is meant, well, to be used for testing. They apparently also ran into some of compatibility issues here already with some browsers. They don't have a fixed timeline yet for when they will start issuing the certificates. But again, this post here by Let's Encrypt staff said that they are getting ready to issue these certificates soon. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for listening. And as always, thanks for recommending, for liking, for subscribing, and talk to you again tomorrow. Bye.